I never believed in signs. People always said, trust your gut, listen to your instincts. But I ignored mine. And because of that, I walked straight into a nightmare. It happened on a quiet evening. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted but satisfied. I had spent the last 6 months grinding, pulling overtime, taking on extra projects, all to make sure that my wife, Naomi, had the life she always wanted. Or at least, the life she told me she wanted. The plan was simple. We were expecting a baby. I had lined everything up, the best prenatal care, the most exclusive postpartum center, even a beautiful nursery filled with everything she could need. Every dollar I had, every ounce of energy I could muster, had gone into preparing for this next chapter. Then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from social media. Someone had tagged me in a post. My stomach churned as I opened it. The picture hit me like a bullet to the chest. Naomi, sitting on a couch, holding hands with another man. Not just any man. Elliot. The guy she had always sworn was just a friend. But the caption is what made my blood turn to ice. Elliot, even if we can't be husband and wife, I'll include your child in the photo. I stopped breathing. Your child. Not our child. Not my child. His child. I read it again, my brain refusing to process it. This had to be a mistake. Maybe she worded it wrong. Maybe. Then I saw it. The way she leaned into him. The way his hand rested on her stomach. The way they looked at each other. Not like friends, but like lovers who had already won. Something inside me snapped. I felt like the walls were closing in. My entire world, the sacrifices, the dreams, the years I had given her, all of it had been a lie. But I didn't panic. I didn't call her, screaming like some desperate fool. Instead, I took a deep breath. Then, I typed one simple comment beneath the picture. If you love him so much, why not just kick me out and stay with him? And with that, I made my first move. I didn't wait for Naomi to respond. I picked up my phone and started dismantling everything she had built off of me. First, I called the postpartum care center and canceled the reservation I had made for her. Next, I called the clinic and erased all her future appointments. Then I went to the nursery, the one I had carefully designed, and started stripping it bare. Every baby item I had bought? Gone. I returned what I could, sold some, and gave away the rest. With every canceled order, with every stripped-down piece of that nursery, I felt lighter. Because this wasn't my child. And Naomi? She was no longer my problem. I wasn't done yet. I picked up my phone and dialed my closest friends, Logan, Miles, and Jordan. Get ready, I said. We're going out tonight. The bar was crowded, the drinks strong. But for the first time in years, I felt free. Logan nudged me. Man, you sure you're okay? You haven't stopped drinking since we got here. I grinned, tipping my glass toward him. You ever see me happier? They all exchanged glances. You're full of shit, Miles said bluntly. You're pissed as hell. Jordan leaned in. Naomi called you yet? I pulled out my phone. 17 missed calls. I shrugged and downed another shot. Yeah, not answering. The satisfaction of ignoring her was intoxicating. Then, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. It wasn't Naomi this time. It was Monica, Naomi's mother. And just like that, I knew the real war was about to begin. I woke up to pounding on my door. Not knocking, pounding. I groaned, rubbing my temples. Whiskey and heartbreak were a deadly mix. The knocking grew louder. Xander, open the damn door. I sighed. I didn't need to look through the peephole. I already knew who it was. I swung the door open, and there she stood, Monica, Naomi's mother, her face twisted in rage. Behind her, Naomi's father, Richard, stood with his arms crossed. You'd better fix this immediately, Monica snapped. Naomi is coming home tonight, and everything better be back in place. I let out a slow, cold laugh. Is Elliot coming with her? Her eyes flashed. What the hell are you talking about? I stepped closer, dropping my voice to a deadly calm. Your daughter cheated on me. She got pregnant with another man's kid, and you have the audacity to show up here and demand that I fix things? Monica stiffened. Richard cleared his throat, suddenly looking uncomfortable. You made a commitment, Xander, Monica hissed. You married Naomi. You promised to take care of her. I laughed in her face. Take care of her? Monica, I have done nothing but sacrifice for Naomi, and she repaid me by fucking Elliot. She clenched her fists. She made a mistake. I tilted my head. Oh yeah? Then why is she still with him? Silence. And then the final insult came. Monica straightened, her voice turning smug. Well, she said, smirking, at least she'll be getting that $15,000 work bonus from you, right? My entire body went still. Then, I grinned. Oh, Monica, I murmured. You must have misunderstood. Her smirk faltered. That money? That's mine. And just like that, her entire face drained of color. Monica's face twisted with disbelief. What do you mean? That money is yours. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, enjoying the way her arrogance crumbled right in front of me. You think I'm just going to hand over $15,000 to a woman who betrayed me? I scoffed. You're out of your damn mind. Monica's lips parted, but for once, she had no words. Richard finally spoke. Xander, be reasonable. No, I cut him off. You be reasonable. I gave everything to Naomi. I worked, I sacrificed, and I stayed loyal while she screwed another man behind my back. And now that I've finally cut her off, you think you can just waltz in here and demand money like I owe her something? Monica's expression darkened. You'll regret this. I smirked. I doubt that. And with that, I slammed the door in her face. I waited, listening for footsteps. A part of me knew Monica would try one last time. And just as expected, a scream of rage erupted from the hallway. You're nothing without Naomi. Nothing. Mark my words, Xander. You're going to come crawling back. I chuckled. If only she knew. That night, at exactly 9:42 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of Naomi's car pulling into the driveway. I stood by the window, watching as she stepped out. She looked different. Not in a good way. Exhausted. Weaker. Like reality had already started crushing her. Elliot wasn't with her. Interesting. I waited. The moment she reached my doorstep, she didn't knock, she banged. I took my time. Then, I opened the door, standing there calm, collected, and utterly unfazed. Her eyes burned with fury. What the hell did you do? I arched an eyebrow. You'll have to be more specific. Her hands curled into fists. The postpartum center. My doctor's appointments. My money. You took everything. I shrugged. Oh, you mean the things I paid for? Yeah, I don't fund cheaters. She let out a sharp breath, nostrils flaring. You're punishing me. No, I said coolly. I'm setting myself free. She looked like she wanted to slap me. Xander, I'm the mother of your child. I laughed. My child? Really? I took a step forward, my voice low and deadly. Then why the hell were you holding Elliot's hand, talking about your child with him? She froze. Her eyes widened in realization. You saw the post, she whispered. I smirked. Oh, I saw everything. Her face turned pale. And no, Xander. I didn't let her finish. Instead, I turned and grabbed the packed boxes by the door. You should take your stuff and leave, I said, shoving them into her arms. Because you sure as hell aren't living here anymore. Naomi's entire body stiffened. You're kicking me out? She choked. I smiled. No, sweetheart. You already left. And this time, she had nowhere to run. Naomi broke down right in front of me. Tears welled in her eyes. And for a moment, I almost believed they were real. Xander, please, she whispered. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but I still love you. I tilted my head. That's funny. You didn't seem to love me when you were in Elliot's arms. She flinched. I just got confused, she mumbled, looking down. But you're my husband. You can't just throw everything away. I folded my arms. You already did. She swallowed, panic creeping into her expression. Okay, she said quickly. If money is what you want, I'll give you the $15K. I have it in my account, I swear. I chuckled darkly. Oh, Naomi, you really should check your bank balance. Her eyebrows furrowed. Then, slowly, she pulled out her phone. The moment she opened her banking app, her face dropped. Where's my money? She gasped. I leaned in, voice dripping with amusement. I froze your account, sweetheart. She screamed. She lunged at me, fists flying, but I dodged easily. You bastard. How dare you? I let her scream, let her fall apart right in front of me. The truth was, Naomi had always been in control. She had spent years manipulating me, using me, playing the perfect wife while secretly building an escape plan. But now, I had flipped the game. She had no money, no home, and no Elliot. Speaking of Elliot, I smirked. Why don't you ask Elliot for help? Naomi froze. She hesitated, and that's when I knew. Elliot had already left her. I laughed right in her face. Oh, Naomi, did you really think he'd stick around once the money ran out? Her face twisted in rage and humiliation. I hate you, she shrieked. I grinned. Good, I said smoothly. That makes this easier. Then, without another word, I shut the door in her face. And just like that, Naomi had finally lost. Days passed. I expected Naomi to disappear, to retreat and lick her wounds. Instead, she tried one last move, a lawsuit. She marched into court, demanding alimony, assets, and even a share of my savings. She thought she could still play the victim. She thought she could still win. But when my lawyer, Anthony Wells, presented proof of her affair, her financial fraud, and even her stolen money, the judge laughed her out of the courtroom. Naomi lost everything. No alimony, no money, no second chances. She walked away humiliated, broken, and alone. Me? I walked away free. And as I watched her storm out of the courthouse, I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I had won. Naomi's life fell apart. Elliot abandoned her. Her family disowned her. Her friends turned their backs on her. She was left with nothing. She tried reaching out one last time. A desperate voicemail. Xander, please. I have nowhere to go. I listened to the message. Then, I deleted it. Because Naomi, she made her choice. And now, she had to live with it. Naomi had spent years crafting her perfect image. The beautiful wife, the social butterfly, the woman with a picture-perfect life. But when the truth came out, that image shattered into dust. She tried to salvage it. She went to her so-called friends, the same women she used to gossip with over brunch, hoping they would side with her. But the moment they found out she had cheated on me, tried to steal my money, and had an affair with Elliot, they turned on her instantly. God, Naomi, how could you do that to Xander? I always knew she was fake. She literally got pregnant with another man's child and still wanted his money. Rumors spread like wildfire. Naomi, the woman who once walked into every room like she owned it, now found herself uninvited from every event, every party, every brunch. She wasn't just embarrassed. She was exiled. Naomi still had one last lifeline. Her parents. But when she went crawling back to Monica and Richard, expecting them to comfort her, she got the shock of her life. Her mother refused to open the door. Her father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking disgusted. You made your bed, Naomi, Richard said coldly. Now sleep in it. Naomi burst into tears, trying to push past him. Mom, Dad, please. But Monica just shook her head. You embarrassed us, she hissed. You lied to everyone, cheated on a good man, and got yourself knocked up by some loser. You think we're going to take you in after that? Naomi screamed. You don't understand. Xander set me up. He turned everyone against me. Her mother laughed. Sweetheart, Xander didn't have to do anything. You destroyed yourself. And then, they slammed the door in her face. Naomi stood there stunned, her entire world gone. She had nowhere left to go. No friends. No family. No money. She was truly, completely alone. While Naomi's life was crumbling, mine was flourishing. I got promoted at work. I reconnected with my friends. I even started dating again. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Then one night, I got a call. It was from a blocked number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. I picked up, and the moment I did, I heard a familiar, broken voice. Xander, please. It's me, Naomi. I smirked. Sorry, sweetheart, I said smoothly. I don't take calls from strangers. And then, I hung up. Because Naomi, she was nothing to me now. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected visit. Jordan, one of my closest friends, showed up at my door. Dude, he said, stepping inside. You won't believe what I just saw. I raised an eyebrow. Try me. Jordan pulled out his phone, tapping the screen, and when he turned it toward me, I almost laughed. It was a picture of Naomi, sitting outside a rundown diner, wearing clothes that looked cheap, hair unkempt, staring off into space. She's working as a waitress now, Jordan said. Word is, she's barely scraping by. I leaned back, a slow grin forming. Perfect. She had spent her whole life looking down on people like that. Now, she was one of them. Naomi didn't just lose her reputation. She lost everything. Elliot? Gone. Her fake friends? Gone. Her parents? Done with her. And now, she was struggling just to survive. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. She had done it all to herself. One evening, as I was leaving work, I saw her. Naomi, standing near my car. She looked pathetic, dark circles under her eyes, her once perfect posture now slumped. I sighed. What do you want, Naomi? She stepped forward, pleading. Xander, I made a mistake. I crossed my arms. Yeah, you did. Tears welled up in her eyes. Can we just talk? I tilted my head. Talk about what? How you lied. How you cheated. How you tried to take me for everything I had. She flinched. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered. But I miss you. I let out a slow, mocking laugh. You don't miss me, Naomi. You miss what I gave you. She looked down, defeated. Just, is there any chance we could try again? She whispered. I paused. Then I smiled. Sure, I said. Her face lit up with hope. Then, I took a step closer, voice dropping to a deadly whisper. If you want to try again, go back to Elliot. Her face fell, and before she could respond, I walked away. Because Naomi, she had already lost. After that night, I never saw Naomi again. She faded into nothing. Me? I moved on. I found real happiness. Because Naomi's greatest punishment wasn't just losing me. It was realizing that I had won. And her? She was just another regret. Naomi thought she could cheat, manipulate, and steal her way through life. She thought I would always be the fool, always forgiving, always cleaning up her mess. But in the end, she destroyed herself. And the best revenge? I never had to lift a finger. She dug her own grave. And I walked away, happier than ever. Because winning isn't about revenge. Winning is about walking away without a scratch, while they're left to burn. Life had always seemed to move in predictable rhythms for Clara. The sprawling suburban home, the prestigious invitations, and the polished surface of her marriage to Victor painted a picture of perfection to the outside world. For nearly 20 years, they had built a life that seemed enviable. 2 kids now in college, high-paying careers, and vacations that graced the envy of their social circle. Yet beneath this veneer lay an unspoken emptiness that Clara could no longer ignore. Victor, a renowned architect, had an almost obsessive dedication to his craft. His designs were celebrated internationally, bringing him acclaim and financial security. But this success came at a cost. Late nights at the office, endless phone calls during dinner, and an emotional unavailability left Clara feeling like a ghost in her own marriage. Over the years, their shared moments dwindled, leaving her yearning for the days when they couldn't keep their hands off each other. It was during one of her lonely mornings, sipping coffee in their vast kitchen, that Clara decided to shake off her melancholy by revisiting an old passion, yoga. She signed up at a local wellness studio, hoping the physical activity would distract her mind. The instructor, Caleb, was a charming man in his mid-30s, with a warm smile and an infectious enthusiasm for life. From the moment they met, his energy was magnetic. Clara found herself looking forward to his classes, not just for the serenity they promised, but for the way Caleb seemed to notice her in a way Victor hadn't in years. What began as casual exchanges after class evolved into friendly conversations. Caleb was attentive, often lingering to share stories about his adventurous travels or to compliment Clara on her progress in yoga. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. She started arriving early to class, her heart quickening when Caleb greeted her with his easy grin. The moment their connection tipped from innocent to something more was subtle. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, Caleb asked if she wanted to grab a smoothie at the cafe next door. Clara hesitated, guilt pricking at her conscience, but her longing for connection outweighed her reservations. Over that simple shared meal, Clara laughed more than she had in months. Caleb's presence was intoxicating, his attention filling a void she had tried to ignore. Days turned into weeks, and their interactions grew bolder. Coffee meetups turned into dinners, where they sat in dimly lit corners sharing secrets that Clara had never dared voice, even to Victor. Caleb made her feel alive in a way that terrified her. His compliments came effortlessly, reminding her of the woman she had been before life dulled her edges. One evening, after a long dinner, Caleb walked her to her car. The air between them crackled with unspoken words. Clara felt her breath hitch when he leaned closer, his hand brushing against hers. For a moment, time stood still. She should have pulled away, thought of Victor, their kids, the life they had built. But instead, she closed the gap, their lips meeting in a kiss that ignited a fire she thought had long been extinguished. That kiss became the turning point. Clara drove home that night with trembling hands, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt churned in her stomach, but it was accompanied by a rush of exhilaration she hadn't felt in years. Caleb's kiss was the spark that awakened something buried deep inside her. A craving for passion, for adventure, for more than the comfortable monotony her life with Victor had become. The next few days were a blur. Clara avoided Caleb's classes, too overwhelmed by her emotions to face him. But avoiding him only made her longing worse. Every quiet moment at home, every glance at Victor's preoccupied expression as he tapped away on his laptop, drove Clara deeper into her thoughts about Caleb. Her guilt was a shadow she couldn't shake, but her yearning for connection was louder. Eventually, Caleb reached out. A simple text, "I miss seeing you in class. Are you okay?" His concern melted Clara's defenses. She replied hesitantly at first, but their messages quickly turned into a late-night conversation that lasted for hours. By the end of it, Caleb had convinced her to meet him for coffee. It was just a talk, he promised. But Clara knew there was no going back. Their meetings became a regular occurrence. They told themselves it was innocent, that they were simply two people connecting over shared interests. But as weeks passed, their bond deepened. Caleb was everything Victor wasn't: attentive, spontaneous, and emotionally available. With him, Clara could breathe. She could laugh without restraint and speak without feeling like her words were dismissed. Yet the double life Clara was leading began to take its toll. She became hyper-aware of her every move, paranoid that Victor might notice the subtle shifts in her behavior. She started dressing with more care, experimenting with bold colors and stylish cuts that had been absent from her wardrobe for years. Victor barely noticed, though. If anything, he seemed grateful for her renewed confidence, mistaking it for happiness rather than the secret it masked. One evening, after a particularly heartfelt conversation with Caleb, he suggested they take a weekend trip together. Clara's heart raced at the idea. It was a bold step, one that pushed the boundaries of their already fragile situation. But Caleb's insistence, his promise of a weekend filled with nothing but laughter and freedom, was too tempting to resist. She lied to Victor, saying she was attending a yoga retreat. It wasn't entirely false, she reasoned. There would be yoga involved. The guilt gnawed at her, but as she packed her bags and drove to meet Caleb, the excitement of their illicit adventure drowned out her inner conflict. The weekend was everything Caleb promised. They stayed at a quaint cabin by a serene lake, surrounded by towering pines and the calming sounds of nature. For those 2 days, Clara allowed herself to forget her responsibilities, her marriage, her life back home. Caleb cooked for her, they went on long walks, and they spent hours talking by the fire. It felt like a dream, intoxicating and dangerous all at once. But dreams, Clara knew, had to end. As she drove back home on Sunday evening, the weight of her choices settled heavily on her shoulders. Victor was waiting for her when she arrived, his face lighting up with genuine warmth as he asked about her trip. The contrast between his trust and her betrayal was unbearable. Clara tried to distance herself from Caleb after that weekend. She told him they needed to stop, that what they were doing was wrong. Caleb, hurt but understanding, agreed. For weeks, Clara threw herself into repairing her marriage. She planned date nights with Victor, made an effort to engage in his world, and even suggested they take a vacation together. But no matter how hard she tried, the spark she was searching for never materialized. Victor remained kind but distant, their conversations superficial and their connection strained. Caleb, meanwhile, was never far from Clara's thoughts. Despite her resolve, she found herself checking her phone for messages from him, longing for the way he made her feel. It was a losing battle, one she knew she couldn't fight forever. Clara's attempts to salvage her marriage felt like trying to revive something that had already withered. She and Victor went through the motions: dinners, polite conversations, even a weekend getaway to the mountains. But there was an invisible wall between them, built from years of unspoken grievances and emotional neglect. Victor, ever the pragmatist, didn't seem to notice. He simply assumed their marriage was fine because nothing overtly wrong had ever been addressed. Clara's facade of a renewed marriage crumbled one rainy evening when Caleb's name flashed on her phone. It was just a simple message: "I miss you. Can we talk?" But it was enough to reignite everything she had tried to suppress. She stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity before typing a hesitant reply: "We shouldn't." But even as she sent the message, Clara knew it was a lie. She wanted to talk to him, to feel the connection that had made her feel alive. Caleb didn't press further, but the door she had tried to close remained slightly ajar. A few days later, Clara found herself back in Caleb's yoga studio. She told herself it was innocent, that she was simply returning to a class she enjoyed. But the moment their eyes met, she knew it was more than that. Caleb's expression was a mix of surprise and longing, and Clara felt her resolve crumble. After class, Caleb approached her. "You're here," he said softly, his voice tinged with relief. "I shouldn't be," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb hesitated, then took a step closer. "I know this is complicated, Clara, but I can't stop thinking about you. I know you feel it too." His words cut through her defenses. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I do," she admitted. "But it doesn't make this right." For the next hour, they sat in the empty studio, talking about everything they had tried to ignore. Caleb shared his frustrations with their situation, his feelings of being caught in a limbo where he couldn't fully have Clara, but couldn't let her go either. Clara, in turn, poured out her own fears and guilt, her longing for Caleb clashing with her loyalty to the life she had built with Victor. By the time they parted, nothing had been resolved, but something had shifted. Their connection was undeniable, and Clara knew she couldn't pretend otherwise. As their affair resumed, Clara became more adept at juggling her double life. She invented excuses for her absences, carefully orchestrated her time, and became increasingly skilled at hiding the truth from Victor. But the stress of maintaining the charade began to weigh on her. Every interaction with Victor felt like a test, every casual question a potential trap. She began to question whether she was losing herself in the process. One evening, as Clara sat alone in the kitchen, Victor walked in, holding a glass of wine. He seemed unusually relaxed, a small smile playing on his lips. "I've been thinking," he said, taking a seat across from her. "We should take that trip to Italy we've always talked about. Just the two of us. What do you think?" Clara's heart sank. Italy had been a dream of theirs for years, a romantic escape they had often fantasized about but never acted on. Now, the thought of spending weeks alone with Victor filled her with dread. "That sounds wonderful," she lied, forcing a smile. "When were you thinking?" Victor shrugged. "I'll have to clear my schedule, but maybe next month?" Clara nodded, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't continue like this. Something had to give. The breaking point came a week later when Caleb, sensing her growing distress, confronted her. "You can't keep living like this, Clara," he said. "It's tearing you apart. You have to make a choice." Clara looked at him, her chest tightening. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "I love what we have, Caleb, but the thought of destroying everything I've built with Victor, I don't know if I can do it." Caleb's expression softened. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "I don't want to pressure you, but you deserve to be happy. And so does Victor. This isn't fair to any of us." His words stayed with her long after they parted. For days, Clara wrestled with her emotions, torn between her loyalty to Victor and her desire for Caleb. She began to notice the cracks in her carefully constructed facade, Victor's puzzled looks when she seemed distracted, her own hesitation when he tried to engage her in conversation. One evening, Clara found herself staring at an old photo album. The images of her and Victor in their early years, laughing, carefree, deeply in love, brought tears to her eyes. She realized that while she couldn't erase the past, she couldn't continue living in its shadow either. With a heavy heart, Clara made her decision. She invited Victor to sit down with her in the living room, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. "Victor, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice quivering. Victor looked at her, his brow furrowing in concern. "What is it?" Clara took a deep breath, the weight of her confession pressing down on her. "I haven't been honest with you. There's someone else?" Victor froze, his expression shifting from concern to shock. His fingers tightened around the arm of the chair as he processed her words. "Someone else?" he repeated, his voice low and disbelieving. Clara nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I never meant for this to happen. I didn't plan it. I've been so lonely, Victor. For years, I've felt like we've been living separate lives under the same roof." Victor leaned back, his face pale. "Who is it?" "It's not about him," Clara said quickly. "It's about us. About what we've lost." Victor's jaw tightened. "Don't tell me it's not about him. If there's someone else, it's about him. Who is it?" Clara hesitated, but she knew there was no point in lying. "His name is Caleb. He's my yoga instructor." Victor let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. "A yoga instructor? Unbelievable. Is this some kind of midlife crisis, Clara? Did you think an affair would fix what's wrong with us?" Her tears spilled over. "I don't know what I thought. I just know that I've been unhappy for so long, and he made me feel alive again. But I'm not here to defend what I did. I'm here because you deserve the truth." Victor stood, pacing the room, his emotions roiling just beneath the surface. "The truth? You think this makes it better? Do you have any idea what you've done to us? To me?" Clara remained seated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know I've hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. We've been broken for years, Victor." Victor stopped pacing and turned to face her. "And you think running to someone else is the answer?" "No," Clara said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't the answer. It was a mistake, and I see that now. But it forced me to confront the reality of our marriage. We've been living like strangers, Victor." He stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pain. "And what now? Do you expect me to just move past this? To act like it never happened?" "I don't expect anything," Clara said softly. "I just needed you to know the truth. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together, or apart. But we can't keep living a lie." The silence that followed was suffocating. Victor sank back into the chair, his head in his hands. Clara could see the war raging within him, the betrayal, the anger, and perhaps, somewhere deep down, the love they once shared. Finally, he spoke, his voice weary. "I need time, Clara. I can't make sense of this right now." Clara nodded, relief and sadness washing over her simultaneously. "Take all the time you need. I'll respect whatever you decide." In the weeks that followed, their home became a battlefield of unspoken tension. Victor retreated into himself, spending hours at the office or locked away in his study. Clara respected his need for space, but the distance between them was unbearable. She found herself questioning whether she had made the right choice in confessing, even though she knew she couldn't have lived with the deceit any longer. Caleb, meanwhile, had stepped back from their relationship. He respected Clara's decision to face the consequences of her actions and refrain from contacting her. While she missed him deeply, she also knew it was for the best. Their relationship had been a catalyst, not a solution. One evening, Victor surprised Clara by asking her to join him for dinner. They sat across from each other at a quiet restaurant, the weight of their shared history palpable between them. For the first time in weeks, they talked, really talked. Victor shared his own struggles, admitting that he had been so consumed by work that he hadn't realized how disconnected they had become. "I'm not excusing what you did," Victor said, his voice steady but firm. "But I can see now that I played a part in this too. I've taken you for granted, Clara, and I'm sorry for that." Clara's heart ached at his words. "I'm sorry too, Victor. For everything. I should have come to you sooner instead of looking for comfort elsewhere." Their conversation stretched late into the night, filled with raw honesty and painful truths. By the time they left the restaurant, there was no resolution, but there was a glimmer of understanding, a fragile thread connecting them once more. Over the following months, Clara and Victor began the arduous process of rebuilding their marriage. It wasn't easy. Trust was a delicate thing, and the scars of Clara's betrayal didn't fade overnight. They attended counseling together, where they confronted their issues head-on and learned to communicate in ways they hadn't before. Clara cut all ties with Caleb, focusing instead on rediscovering the connection she had once shared with Victor. There were setbacks, moments when doubt and resentment threatened to unravel their progress. But there were also moments of hope, shared laughter, quiet evenings, and small gestures that reminded them why they had chosen each other all those years ago. In time, their marriage transformed. It was no longer the picture-perfect illusion they had once projected to the world, but something real and imperfect. They had weathered a storm that could have destroyed them, emerging on the other side with a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. Clara often reflected on the choices that had brought her to this point. She knew she would carry the weight of her actions for the rest of her life, but she also knew they had led her to a place of growth and healing. In facing her flaws and vulnerabilities, she had found the strength to fight for what truly mattered. And while the road ahead was uncertain, Clara and Victor walked it together, one step at a time, ready to face whatever came next. The streets of Philadelphia were alive with the usual Friday night chaos. Honking cars, pedestrians hustling to their destinations, and the faint hum of distant music spilling out of nearby bars. But Daniel Brown didn't notice any of it. His attention was on the glowing menu board outside the Sheridan restaurant. He squinted, mentally calculating how far his meager savings would stretch. It was his 50th birthday, and for once, he wanted to treat himself. Inside, diners sat under crystal chandeliers, their laughter muffled by the thick glass separating Daniel from the world he hadn't been a part of in years. He tugged at the collar of his thrift store shirt, the stiff fabric itching against his neck. The corduroy jacket, a gift from the church's auxiliary ladies, felt oversized and foreign. Still, it was the nicest thing he owned, and tonight he wanted to feel like someone who belonged, if only for a few hours. Just as he stepped toward the door, a voice stopped him. "Excuse me," a woman said, her tone brisk yet polite. Daniel turned, startled. She was striking, tall, poised, and dressed in a tailored navy dress that spoke of sophistication and purpose. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she approached, her dark curls framing a face that held both authority and charm. "I couldn't help but notice you standing there," she continued, her eyes scanning him briefly. "Are you dining alone?" Daniel blinked, unsure how to respond. "Yes." "Why?" The corners of her mouth lifted into a practiced smile. "I have a bit of a situation and was hoping you could help." His eyebrows rose. "Help?" "Yes," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Marcia Nelson. I'm supposed to attend an awards ceremony at Empire Hall, but my planned chaperone canceled last minute. It's inconvenient, and frankly, I can't show up alone." Daniel stared at her, his mind scrambling to make sense of her words. "I'm sorry, but why are you asking me?" Marcia's smile faltered for a moment, replaced by something softer. "Because you're here. And because, quite honestly, I'm desperate." The absurdity of the situation hit him like a wave. A stranger, a polished, confident stranger, was asking him, a janitor from St. Vincent's Church, to play the role of her companion at what sounded like a high society event. He glanced down at his scuffed brown wingtips, feeling the weight of every wrinkle in his shirt. "Listen," Marcia said, sensing his hesitation. "The meal's already paid for, and all you'd have to do is sit with me, look charming, and nod politely through a few speeches. No strings attached. What do you say?" Daniel hesitated. His stomach growled, a not-so-subtle reminder of the canned soup waiting for him back at the church. And yet something about Marcia's earnestness, her refusal to treat him as anything less than an equal, stirred a long-buried part of him. He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." Marcia's face lit up. "Perfect. Let's go." She didn't give him time to reconsider, linking her arm through his and steering him down the street. Daniel barely had a chance to glance back at the Sheraton's menu before it disappeared from view. Empire Hall was a vision of grandeur. Marble floors gleamed under soft golden lights, and crystal chandeliers hung like jeweled crowns from the high ceilings. The hum of polite conversation filled the air as men in tailored suits and women in glittering gowns moved about with practiced elegance. Daniel followed Marcia closely, feeling like a fish out of water in his borrowed clothes. She seemed to glide effortlessly through the crowd, exchanging nods and smiles with people who looked at him with mild curiosity. "Don't worry," she whispered, sensing his unease. "You're doing great." They reached their table, where name cards identified Marcia as one of the evening's honorees. As they sat, Daniel tried to blend into the background, keeping his movements small and his gaze low. "Daniel, was it?" asked a man across the table, his voice friendly but probing. "Yes," Daniel replied, offering a small smile. "Marcia didn't mention you earlier. Are you two together?" Before Daniel could respond, Marcia leaned in, her voice smooth as silk. "Daniel is my guest for the evening, a good friend and an excellent conversationalist." The man raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. Daniel felt a rush of gratitude toward Marcia for deflecting the question so effortlessly. As the night progressed, Daniel began to relax. The speeches, though long, gave him a chance to observe Marcia. She was charming and articulate, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. When she laughed at something the keynote speaker said, it was genuine, not the forced politeness he had come to expect from people in her position. For the first time in years, Daniel felt normal. Later, as they exited the hall, Marcia handed him a small box wrapped in gold paper. "What's this?" Daniel asked, confused. "A thank you gift," she said, smiling. "You saved me tonight. I figured it's only fair I return the favor." Daniel hesitated, then opened the box. Inside was a silver pen, elegant and understated. He stared at it, unsure what to say. "Happy birthday," Marcia added softly, surprising him. "How did you—" "You mentioned it earlier," she said, her eyes twinkling. "I have a good memory." For the first time that night, Daniel laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that echoed in the quiet street. The pen felt cold in Daniel's pocket as he walked back to St. Vincent's that night. The warmth of Marcia's kindness lingered, but it was quickly eclipsed by the chill of memory creeping into his chest. Birthdays had never been extravagant for him, just small dinners with Caroline and Claire, maybe a thoughtful gift. But this night felt like a mirror, reflecting the man he had become against the shadow of the man he once was. The bell above the church door jingled softly as he entered. The hall was quiet, save for the distant hum of Father Doyle's radio. Daniel's footsteps echoed faintly as he walked down the narrow corridor to his small, sparse room in the basement. He collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, and allowed himself to remember. The sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of their Westchester home, casting delicate patterns on the walls. The house was warm and comfortable, the kind of place Daniel had always dreamed of having. He had worked hard for it, endless hours as an actuary, crunching numbers to ensure a stable future for his family. "Morning, sweetheart," Caroline said, setting a mug of coffee on the kitchen table. She kissed his cheek absently, her lips cool and impersonal. "Morning," Daniel replied, hiding the sting of her distance. The days of warm embraces and shared laughter had faded over the years. Caroline's job at Bixler Enterprises demanded long hours, and she seemed to thrive in that world. Her sharp wit and quick charm made her indispensable to the company's CEO, Carl Bixler, a man Daniel had only met twice and disliked both times. Their daughter, Claire, was the glue that held them together. Even as a teenager, she had a way of diffusing tension with her bright smile and boundless energy. But when she left for college that September, the cracks in Daniel and Caroline's marriage widened into chasms. It was a Friday evening when the truth shattered his world. Daniel had come home early, excited to surprise Caroline with takeout from her favorite Italian restaurant. He imagined her smiling for the first time in weeks, maybe even laughing at one of his corny jokes. But as he entered the house, the sound of a suitcase being zipped broke through his thoughts. Caroline stood in the foyer, dressed impeccably as always. A suitcase sat at her feet, its wheels gleaming against the polished floor. "Going somewhere?" Daniel asked, his voice light, but tinged with confusion. She didn't look at him. "I'm heading to the Poconos for the weekend." "Work trip?" "No," she replied, her tone flat. "I'm going with Carl." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Daniel felt his heart stop, his mind scrambling to process what she had just said. "Carl Bixler?" he asked, as though there might be another Carl she was referring to. "Yes," She finally met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I thought it was time to be honest with you. Carl and I, we've been seeing each other for a while." "A while? How long was a while? Months? Years?" Daniel's mind raced, cycling through every moment over the past year that hadn't made sense. The late nights at the office, the sudden weekend conferences, the way she avoided his touch. It all fell into place with horrifying clarity. "You're serious," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'm serious," Caroline replied. "I didn't want it to come out like this, but you deserve to know." Deserve? What did he deserve? Betrayal? Humiliation? What about us? Daniel asked, his voice trembling. "What about Claire?" "Claire's an adult now," Caroline said dismissively. "She'll understand eventually. And as for us, Daniel, there hasn't been an us for a long time." Her words struck him like a physical blow. He wanted to yell, to demand answers, but the fight drained out of him. "When will you be back?" he asked numbly. Caroline hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know." She picked up her suitcase and walked out the door without another word. Daniel stood frozen in the foyer, the faint scent of her perfume lingering like a ghost. The next day, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers Caroline had left behind. She hadn't even waited for his response. The papers were unsigned, a declaration of her intention to erase him from her life without discussion. Daniel's eyes moved to the wedding photo on the mantel. They had looked so happy that day, their smiles genuine and full of promise. What had gone wrong? Had he been too busy? Too blind? Or had Caroline simply stopped loving him without telling him? By Sunday, Daniel had packed a single suitcase. He left the house key on the kitchen counter and walked out, leaving behind the life he had built. Daniel closed his eyes, the weight of those memories pressing down on him. Caroline's betrayal had hollowed him out, leaving him a shell of the man he once was. But Marcia's words from earlier in the evening echoed in his mind. "You're more than you think you are. You've just forgotten." For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to wonder if that could be true. The basement of St. Vincent's Church was small and dimly lit, but it offered Daniel something he hadn't realized he needed: anonymity. The creak of his cot as he sat down felt like a whisper of his new life. Unadorned, utilitarian, and, most importantly, quiet. When Daniel had first approached Father Doyle, seeking work and shelter, he hadn't expected much. The priest had studied him with curious eyes, a gentle but probing gaze that seemed to see past the facade Daniel tried to wear. "Why here?" Doyle had asked, folding his hands over his desk. Daniel hesitated before answering. "I need to start over. Somewhere simple. Somewhere unconnected to my past." Father Doyle nodded, seemingly satisfied. "We can use someone handy around the church. It's not much, room, board, and a modest stipend, but you'll earn your keep." "I'm not looking for much," Daniel replied quietly. And so, Daniel's new life began. His days were filled with routine tasks: scrubbing the sanctuary's stone floors, repairing broken pews, and fixing leaky faucets in the soup kitchen. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from the storm in his mind. Each morning, Daniel rose before dawn. He would light a candle in the church's main hall, the flickering flame casting long shadows over the altar. The silence of the early hours felt like a balm, soothing the ache he couldn't quite articulate. "Morning, Daniel." Father Doyle would greet him as he passed by with his coffee. "Morning, Father," Daniel would reply, offering a small nod. He liked the simplicity of their exchanges. There were no prying questions, no expectations beyond the work that needed to be done. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel found himself blending into the rhythm of the church. The parishioners came to know him as a quiet but reliable presence. Some would greet him warmly, while others would simply nod in passing. It was enough. The auxiliary ladies who ran the thrift store and organized charity events often left small gifts for him: a sweater that looked like his size or a pair of sturdy work boots. Daniel accepted these gestures with quiet gratitude, though he rarely used anything beyond what was absolutely necessary. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And for a man who felt he had lost his identity, it was a start. The nights were harder. Alone in his small room, with only the hum of the old radiator for company, Daniel's mind often wandered back to the life he had left behind. He thought of Claire and wondered if she resented him for disappearing. He thought of Caroline and tried to make sense of her betrayal. He thought of their home in Westchester, wondering if she had filled it with memories that didn't include him. Some nights, the weight of it all felt unbearable. He would sit by the small window in his room, staring at the faint glow of streetlights outside, and ask himself if leaving had been the right choice. But the alternative, staying in a house filled with echoes of love turned cold, felt even worse. One afternoon, about 6 months into his new life, Father Doyle approached Daniel with an unusual request. "Daniel," he said, leaning against the doorway of the storeroom where Daniel was organizing supplies. "We've been invited to a community meeting about the homeless crisis in the area. I'd like you to come with me." Daniel frowned. "Me? Why?" "You've been working closely with our homeless center," Doyle said. "You understand their needs better than most. Your perspective would be valuable." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, or even the room where decisions were made. "I'm not sure I'd be much help," he said. "You might surprise yourself," Doyle replied with a knowing smile. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. The meeting was held in a small conference room at the local community center. Around the table sat city officials, nonprofit leaders, and a few local activists. Daniel felt out of place among them, his thrift store clothes a stark contrast to their polished appearances. But as the discussion began, something shifted. One of the officials dismissed an idea about expanding the church's soup kitchen, citing budget concerns. Daniel, who had seen firsthand the impact the kitchen had on the community, found himself speaking up. "With all due respect," he said, his voice steady but firm, "the soup kitchen isn't just about feeding people. It's about dignity. It's about letting people know they're seen and cared for." The room fell silent, all eyes on him. For a moment, Daniel felt exposed, but then he saw a few heads nodding in agreement. By the end of the meeting, Father Doyle clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, Daniel. Really good." For the first time in years, Daniel felt a flicker of pride. As the months went by, Daniel began to rediscover parts of himself he thought were lost. He took on more responsibilities at the church, overseeing repairs and helping coordinate events. The community came to respect him, not just as the quiet janitor, but as a man who genuinely cared. Still, there was a part of him that remained guarded. He had built a life of quiet stability, but the scars of his past hadn't faded. And then Marcia Nelson walked into his life, shattering the fragile equilibrium he had built. The soft light of early evening bathed the streets of Philadelphia as Daniel walked alongside Marcia. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement, a sound that seemed to underscore her confident stride. Daniel, in contrast, felt acutely aware of every step he took, conscious of his ill-fitting shoes and thrift store ensemble. "So, Daniel," Marcia began, breaking the silence. "What's your story?" Daniel tensed. It wasn't the first time someone had asked him that since he started his new life at St. Vincent's, but it was the first time he cared about the opinion of the person asking. "Not much to tell," he said, keeping his voice neutral. Marcia glanced at him sideways, her eyes sharp and probing. "Come on. Everyone has a story. You don't seem like the type to end up working at a church by accident." Daniel hesitated, then offered a small smile. "Maybe another time." Marcia didn't press further, and he was grateful. They arrived at the entrance to Empire Hall, the grand venue gleaming with polished brass and marble. A doorman greeted Marcia with a nod and opened the door for them. Daniel followed her inside, feeling like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. The room buzzed with activity. Men in sharp suits and women in glittering gowns mingled, their laughter and conversation blending into a low, pleasant hum. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the space, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Marcia navigated the crowd with ease, offering polite nods and quick greetings. Daniel trailed behind her, trying to look inconspicuous. "Relax," Marcia said, leaning toward him as they reached their table. "You're doing fine. I feel like I'm sticking out like a sore thumb," Daniel muttered. "You're not," she replied with a reassuring smile. "Trust me." The table was already occupied by several people. most of whom greeted Marcia warmly. She introduced Daniel as her guest for the evening, a phrase that raised a few eyebrows but didn't invite any direct questions. As the evening progressed, Daniel found himself listening more than speaking. The conversations around the table were lively, ranging from business strategies to local politics. Daniel felt out of his depth, but managed to contribute a few polite comments when asked. Marcia, for her part, seemed entirely at ease. She laughed easily, her wit and charm drawing people in. Daniel couldn't help but admire her confidence, though it also made him painfully aware of his own insecurities. As the event wound down, Marcia turned to Daniel. Let's step outside for a bit. It's getting stuffy in here. They found a quiet spot on the balcony, the cool night air a welcome relief from the warmth of the crowded hall. Marcia leaned against the railing, her expression thoughtful. You did great tonight, she said. Better than I expected. Honestly, Daniel chuckled softly. Thanks, I think. She smiled, then grew serious. You're not like most people I meet at these events. There's a groundedness to you. It's refreshing. Daniel looked out at the city lights, unsure how to respond. I guess life is a way of grounding you, he said after a moment. Marcia tilted her head, studying him. You're not going to tell me, are you? What happened to you? It's not a story for tonight, he replied, his voice quiet but firm. She nodded, seeming to accept his answer. Fair enough. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the distant sounds of the city filling the space between them. 2 weeks later, Marcia returned to St. Vincent's. Daniel was in the middle of repairing a pew when she appeared in the doorway, her sharp silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun. Busy? She asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Always. What brings you here? I need another favor, she said, stepping into the church. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Another event? Sort of, she replied. There's a charity auction next weekend, and I'd rather not go alone. Daniel hesitated. The evening at Empire Hall had been pleasant enough, but the thought of stepping into another high society event made him uneasy. Marcia must have sensed his hesitation because she added, it's a small event. Local artists mostly. Nothing as fancy as last time. He sighed. I don't have anything to wear. She grinned. Leave that to me. The charity auction was held in a smaller, more intimate venue. True to Marcia's word, it lacked the opulence of Empire Hall, but it was no less vibrant. Paintings and sculptures lined the walls, each tagged with starting bids. The crowd was smaller and more relaxed, their conversations tinged with genuine enthusiasm rather than calculated networking. Marcia led Daniel through the room, stopping occasionally to examine a piece of art or greet someone she knew. What do you think of this one? She asked, pointing to a painting of a sunset over the city. Daniel studied it for a moment. It's nice, simple, but comforting. Marcia smiled. Good eye. I think I'll bid on it. They continued browsing, the easy rhythm of their conversation surprising Daniel. He felt less like an outsider this time, more like a participant. At one point, Marcia turned to him, her expression thoughtful. You're good at this, you know. At what? Blending in, she said. You might not think so, but you have a way of making people comfortable. Daniel shrugged. I'm just trying not to embarrass you. You couldn't if you tried, she replied with a wink. After the auction, Marcia insisted on treating Daniel to dinner at a small local restaurant. The setting was cozy and unpretentious, a welcome contrast to the grandeur of their previous outing. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, their conversation grew more personal. Why do you do it? Daniel asked suddenly. Do what? Marcia replied, swirling her wine. These events, the auctions, the galas, why do you care so much? She considered his question for a moment. I guess I've always believed that if you have the ability to help, you should. Not everyone gets a fair shot in life. If I can tip the scales, even just a little, it's worth it. Daniel nodded, her words resonating with him more than he expected. What about you? She asked. Why St. Vincent's? He hesitated, then offered a small smile. It's a long story. Marcia leaned forward, her eyes glinting with curiosity. I got time. A month later, Daniel's quiet world was disrupted once more. Seymour Schlumpf, a name and face from his past, appeared at a local charity event Marcia had invited him to. The moment Seymour spotted him, his booming voice filled the room. "Danny boy!" Seymour exclaimed, wrapping Daniel in a bear hug. "I almost didn't recognize you with that beard." Daniel froze, caught between embarrassment and irritation. Seymour's sudden presence felt like a jolt back to a life he had spent years trying to leave behind. As introductions were made, Seymour wasted no time catching Daniel up on his financial situation. "You know," Seymour said with a sly grin, "your ex-wife didn't touch a cent of your investments. I've been managing them all this time. You're sitting on a nice little nest egg, my friend." Daniel's stomach churned at the mention of Caroline. He hadn't thought of her in months, but Seymour's revelation brought her back to the forefront of his mind. "She divorced you 3 years ago," Seymour continued, lowering his voice. "Signed everything over without a fight. Guess her new man didn't want the baggage." Marcia's sharp eyes flicked to Daniel. "Is this the same Caroline you mentioned? The one who left?" Daniel nodded stiffly. "She's still with this guy?" Marcia asked, her tone casual but laced with curiosity. Seymour smirked. "Oh, she's still with him. Carl Bixler. Rich as sin, but not for much longer. Word is his health's failing, and Caroline's been running the show. If you ask me, it's only a matter of time before the house of cards collapses." Later that night, Daniel sat with Marcia, the pieces of a plan forming in his mind. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked softly. Daniel sighed. "What was there to say? She betrayed me. I left. End of story." Marcia leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with determination. "It doesn't have to be the end. You have the resources now, Daniel. The power to take back what she tried to steal from you. Not just your money, but your dignity." Her words struck a chord. Over the next few weeks, with Marcia's legal expertise and Seymour's insider knowledge, Daniel began to lay the groundwork for his revenge. The plan was precise and ruthless. First, Daniel reclaimed his old home in Westchester, evicting the tenants and putting it up for sale. The proceeds were funneled into a series of charitable donations under his name, subtly outshining Caroline's public persona. Next came the financial maneuvers. Seymour uncovered discrepancies in the Bixler Company's accounts, evidence of Caroline's mismanagement disguised as oversight. Daniel anonymously forwarded the information to a journalist known for exposing corporate fraud. The final step was personal. At a high-profile gala where Caroline was set to receive an award for her philanthropic efforts, Daniel made his move. Caroline looked radiant as she took the stage, her practiced smile hiding the chaos Daniel knew was brewing behind the scenes. As she began her speech, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Whispers of the exposé published that morning filled the room, tarnishing her pristine reputation. Daniel watched from the sidelines, satisfaction coursing through him. When Caroline's voice faltered, he stepped forward, locking eyes with her. "Daniel," she stammered, the microphone amplifying her shock. "Surprised to see me?" he asked, his tone calm but cutting. The crowd turned to watch as Daniel detailed her betrayal and deceit, his voice steady and clear. Caroline's mask slipped, revealing the desperation beneath. By the time he finished, her carefully constructed world had crumbled. With the revenge complete, Daniel felt an unexpected sense of peace. He sold his remaining assets, donated a portion to St. Vincent's, and focused on building a new life with Marcia. Their relationship deepened as they navigated their past wounds together. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to hope for a future filled with love and purpose. He also reached out to Claire, beginning the slow process of reconciliation. Though their relationship was tentative, it held the promise of healing. A year later, Daniel and Marcia stood in a small chapel surrounded by friends and family. As they exchanged vows, Daniel felt the weight of his past finally lift. Looking into Marcia's eyes, he saw not just love, but a reflection of the man he had become, stronger, wiser, and finally free. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought him here, to a place of renewal and hope. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt whole.